Hey, all right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Walter Alcorn. I'm the chair of the MBTC WMATA Committee, and welcome everyone to the committee meeting of April 19th. So I'd like to note that we're starting the meeting at 6:04 p.m. Meeting is being live streamed, and those that are listening and watching will be able to do so through YouTube Live. And we do have tonight two members that are participating remotely or virtually. I know at least one of them, I believe, Mr. Smedberg, is participating virtually for a personal reason as he is out of state on travel. And is Mr. Letourneau logged in yet? Not yet. Okay, I understand he will be participating virtually from Loudoun County for a personal reason due to a work-related conflict. But with that in mind, I'll ask staff if we have a quorum. Yes, we do. Okay, then let's go ahead and get started. So we do have a few items on our agenda tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one is the January 25th MBTC WMATA Committee meeting summary. This is a summary that has been distributed. Do any committee members have any changes? Okay, seeing no changes, then we'll just assume that summary as approved. So now we have a presentation from WMATA staff on WMATA's Better Bus Network redesign. And those of us on TPB actually are somewhat familiar with this as well from earlier today. Spent a little time on this. So we have invited WMATA staff to brief the committee on the draft Better Bus Network redesign. It was launched in July 2022. To create a bus network that, and here I'm quoting, matches when and where people want to travel, provides frequent and reliable service, and addresses inequities and increases access to opportunities for disenfranchised communities. So the presentation we will be receiving draft visionary bus network that the region could achieve with over time and as additional resources become available. So I'm pleased to introduce Peter Cafiero, the Managing Director of the Intermodal Planning, and Allison Davis, the Acting Senior VP of Planning and Sustainability for WMATA, to give us an update on the draft visionary bus network and its work across the region and in Virginia. And everyone should be able to see this presentation online, and have this. So take it away.
All right, thank you. And there's today at TPB, so it's not all the same. So that's good.
You is fine. I'm okay with
yes. So on behalf of the Better Bus redesign team, Peter, we're also joined by our colleague Al Himes, who's director of bus planning and scheduling at Metro. So we're thrilled to be here and briefing you. I was going to say in advance of the launch, but we launched on Monday, so we are just of the draft visionary network. And so we just launched 50 days with 50 events because it was Metro Bus's 50th anniversary. So in honor of that, we are going to be out and about across the region. We're out in Anacostia today, and we are covering the region to hear from customers because we can't highlight that enough. We really do want to hear from people. This is a draft network. I know a lot of people assume what comes out now is foregone conclusion, but this is draft. It is visionary. It is really trying to put out where people, what connections are needed and kind of frequencies and all of that. But say it is designed, we partnered with Q, the city of Fairfax, as well as the bus from Prince George's County to really redesign all three of those services together. But we also obviously built on and enhanced all the work that's been happening with other jurisdictional partners. And I know like the transit strategic plans that all of Virginia have to do, like that has given us a really good firm that we're doing. So, and then finally, Ride On in Montgomery County is doing their own study. So we are partnering with them. There's a lot of redesign happening in the region, which is great. So if you can go to the next slide. Like I said, we are doing this hand in hand with our traditional partners because we know that bus can be serving customers better than we are, right? Customers, every time we go out and survey, when you all go out and survey, customers tell us every time they want frequent, reliable, safe, convenient transit that operates, that gets them where they want to go when they want to travel. And so we need that. The region needs that to really get people to leave their cars at home. That's what helps us meet all of those greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that we have across the region. Expand that access to economic opportunity. That's really critical for people. And so the data that we have is really telling us there's a lot of opportunity here. We know there are lots of trips in the region that are happening. But bus is really only getting about 5% of those trips on any given day. So there's a lot of room for growth. We based this visionary network on three kind of major sources. One, the public input that we went out last fall to hear from people, and some of that, I'm going to boil this down into one sentence, but really one of the things we heard is 45% of the respondents to our survey said that service that they have is actually very good or excellent. So that is not saying we're going to rest on our laurels and do nothing, but that is to say that we don't have to scrap everything and start totally new. There is service out there that is working well for people. We have obviously our existing service, and we understand like how well service does operate places where it isn't quite doing what it should. Maybe it's a little too circuitous, could be more direct. So we have those that data, but we also have travel patterns of the region. Understanding where those opportunities are, adjacent neighborhoods where there's a lot of movement between them, but we're not serving well by transit. That's the opportunity, right? So how do we pull apart those opportunities? So I will say, to summarize, we're really defining that visionary network on following 6 things. So 1, frequent service that runs all day, 7 days a week, right? So it's all day, all week frequent service. Having a minimum of 30 minutes for frequency. A 24-hour network, really connecting some of those key on major routes and key places like Union Station, Dulles Airport, like places where we know there is 24-hour things happening. We need late, early shift workers, that sort of thing. Connections between the Metro Rail network, direct connections. So again, we are working with the street network. There's only so much directness we can do. But we really want to make sure that we're making those direct connections, and then obviously maximizing the bus priority investments that you all are doing out on the streets. So next slide. One of the questions, so we are about halfway done with this project, and one of the questions we've had is like, why are we starting with visionary? I want to see, what can we what can we implement sooner? And it's really, we're focused on the visionary network because it's putting out all of those opportunities and really trying to make those connections, put the frequency that the region needs. And so the visionary network is visionary, but it's also achievable, right? Assuming we can, that requires more operators, all of that. So it's not saying, tomorrow, but we're really trying to put forward that path, and it again follows those transit strategic plans that many in Virginia already do. So I'm going to turn this over to Peter to talk through some of those highlights. But one last thing. We are the feedback that we're getting now is, I think over the next 48 days, is really what's going to drive a lot of those trade-offs between frequency and span and directness, and that's what's going to help us into a more constrained network that is implementable in the near term.
We are getting feedback right now. We're actually in a meeting just before we came out here, looking at some of the online comments we've already gotten, including many from Virginia. So people are going into the website and leaving comments, and we've started our pop-ups. We had one in Anacostia that I stopped up today. Many in Virginia that Allison will talk to. So we're getting comments. The slide. So as Allison mentioned, we really emphasizing connectivity in the region, quality of service for our customers, where we can make things more direct, and I'll show some examples about that. Always trade-offs, all our routes work for some people right now, and it's a question of how we can make it better for as many as possible. And our operators as well are a big part of that. And equity that we mentioned before. If we do all these things together, all these improvements, we could get as many as 40 to 50,000 more riders a day, which translates to about 15 million more a year. And as Allison mentioned, that translates. Those are people that are coming primarily out of cars, and so that's better for the environment, better for traffic flow. Next slide. So we showed some examples, and this, if you did watch the board meeting, and certainly Chairman Smedberg was there, you've seen many of the slides, but we did. The board presentation was covering the whole region. We wanted to zoom into Virginia for this presentation. So as an example of some of the changes that we're looking at, just to orient you on this map, the color scheme, red routes shown here are routes that are 12 minutes or less, so basically our frequent service network. And you see in this part of, probably the most dense part of Virginia right now in terms of service, there isn't any specific red showing up here because there's a lot of different flavors, particularly on Columbia Pike. We have, a lot of routes all together combined provide that service, but there's a lot of just variations, and that's one of the things we wanted to clear up. The Metroway does fit that 12-minute network. Dark blue is 20 minutes. Light blue is basically 30 minutes, and black, of which there are some on this map, are over 30 minutes frequency, which we felt for a visionary network was not really something we wanted we felt was, if we were running a route, it was running that it should be at least every 30 minutes. If you go to the next slide.
And Peter, before you move on, those committee members that have the hard copy, it actually shows up a little better.
Right. Well, so the next slide, because this is an animated slide, so you'll see the next slide there.
Yes.
Yes, the red pop. So this is our proposal. So a lot more red on this map on Columbia Pike, on Transit Way in Alexandria, and a lot more frequency just in general across the region, and pretty much very similar in Virginia. There's a significant increase in service on weekends proposed, middays, and that's where we found the biggest mismatch between when people are traveling and what our bus service is doing today. Our bus service, in the rush hours is relatively speaking matching what people are doing, but we really tail off, particularly on the weekends compared to where trips are going. We made some improvements in September of 21 to close that gap a bit, but there's still a long way to go. Next slide, please. Another way we look to connect the region. Here we wanted to show the work we've been doing with our partners at Q in the city of Fairfax. So this map, if you look actually on the screen and not at the candidates right now, this is if you're in Fairfax today, in the city of Fairfax, I should say, where you can get to by Metrobus and Q, and directly in downtown. I don't believe there's any connector routes. So if you go to the proposed, so next slide, shows that we've significantly expanded the reach of how you can get to George Mason, to the city of Fairfax itself, by extending what's now the 1A, right, to 2A, coming across from Arlington over to Dunloring, and then continuing that onwards into the city of Fairfax and George Mason. The proposal takes, right now, the Q routes are two-way loops that both go from Vienna Metro Station down to George Mason. In this proposal, one of those routes basically gets sort of cut and split open, so it's actually going from Vienna through past George Mason and out further to the west. So collectively, improvement in service, and then that route on the south side is a route that's currently very infrequent, that we feel should have more frequency, and a route going up to Tyson's, which I understand used to exist in the old, years ago, was very infrequent. We think the market has grown, and better service would actually achieve ridership. Overall, the overnight service, 1.1 million residents regionally would gain access to service in the middle of the night. We are the nation's capital. We don't have a 24-hour system right now. And we looked at hospitals, schools, all the major things that we need to connect to. Next slide, please. Another example, which we did show at the board meeting, is example directness. So this is the Route 10B currently goes from Boston at the north, Boston Metro, down to King Street at the south end, or to Alexandria Old Town on the south end. It has that squiggly spaghetti in the middle, which is the route trying to get in and out of Shirlington Transit Center. Now, transit centers are things we definitely want to connect to, but there were a lot of routes that go into Shirlington. There's a lot of transfer connections from this route. Going into Shirlington cost 15 minutes for people who didn't want to go there, who wanted to just get across to Arlington, to Alexandria. And so we felt that was a worthwhile trade-off to keep it on Glebe Road and actually swing it over to take advantage of the Metroway and the growing employment and retail opportunities there with Potomac Yards on its way out to Alexandria. We do have other routes that will cover the section that it currently operates on through Delray.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr.
Since you're
Gray.
on it, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because 10B used to go down Mount Vernon, right?
Right. So there is another route in there. I mean, this is just an example, one of the examples of some of the changes we did, but there is
Well,
another
specifically,
route
I guess, to how, because if you're doing this across different routes, so how are you intending to reinforce service that was existing before?
So there is a route from
There's still
Pentagon
there's
down
still
to
what's comparable to 10A road station up through Delray, and then down.
Basically, my question is, so is the 10A going to have more frequency? And as an example for other areas, would a route that is diverting an existing route, will it get more frequency or will it stay the same?
Yeah, so that route would have, the 10A alignment would have more frequency as well. There's a lot more frequency in this network overall.
so the challenge will be, when we get to the next phase of the study and what we could do sooner and how we make all those things fit. But we definitely, we intentionally highlighted this route because it's showing some of the trade-offs. So you can provide better service by shortening the route, by making it more direct to some places, but that means it's not, other people may have to transfer. So those are some of the again, this is a vision concept. It's not even the final visionary network. We're going to take the feedback we're getting. Allison will talk to some of how we'll do that in a second, but that's where we go. Now, again, our estimate is if we did things like this throughout the region, 10% we'd have 10% more trips that would be 30 minutes or less, which is really a trip that we feel is very gettable as a transit trip. And 20% of the trips would be more convenient relative to other modes than they are now. There's, we're not saying that every bus trip is going to be as fast as hopping in your car and going, to where down the road. But if trips are taking 4 or 5 times longer, they're just not trips we're competing with. And so this is trying to bring trips back to be more competitive to the point where we do see an increase in ridership, both to improve the service for people who are on those buses now because they have to, as well as try to increase the market share. Allison, you mentioned before about us maximizing the investment that all of the jurisdictions are making in priority, in bus priority, either through bus lanes, traffic signal priority, other kinds of enforcement, jobs, other means, and as well as Metroway itself, which was a huge investment for this part of the region, and making use of those 7 days a week. So as the physical investment is there, let's make use of it in the long term. The next slide. So I'll conclude my part and give it back to Allison. Just a couple of highlights. We mentioned all the coordination we've been doing, and she'll talk more about with our bus operators and jurisdictional partners. But I would note that this is, in this first network, this is what we call operator agnostic. So we've not identified, it's a Fairfax Connector route or a Metrobus route or anything like that. if it's a new route. We've taken the existing routes of those other operators, and we're assuming they're there, or their planned routes. But right now, we didn't want to get into that whole discussion. We wanted to focus on where the customers need to go. And this all, region-wide, this is an expansive network. It would add about 35% more. It says funding. I mean, it's more hours and miles. It may be making more efficient use of some of those resources. So it may not be exactly 35% in terms of dollars, but it's clearly significantly more than we have now. We understand that, and even if the money was there, we don't have the operators. So we need to have that as our vision, and then work in the next phases as to how we can begin to go in that direction. So Allison, if you want to.
Yes. All right. So next slide. Oh, all right. Next slide. Next slide. So like I said, it is 50 years of Metrobus. That was in February. And so we are going to be out across the region doing 50 events over the next 50 days. If you want to go to the slide. We've got a host of different events. First, we've got community workshops. We've got the one at Central Library on May 10th from 3 to 7 p.m. in Arlington. And that's really where we'll have kind of much more engagement in terms of allowing parents to come bring their kids, and like parents can participate while the kids have activities, right? So it's a way to really try and engage the community and be in a place where people generally are. We obviously recognize that the way to really get to people is going to pop-ups, going to where people are. That's transit centers, farmers markets, other types of transit hubs, that sort of thing. So we will be out doing that, and we've got a map in here that talks to where we are in Virginia. We've got 3 lunch and learns coming up. One that's each 3 of them, they're going to drill down onto each one of the major jurisdictions in the region, and then we're moving. Did bus stop chats last fall, and we've kind of recognized like great way to do this is to actually ride the bus with people, because then they're really captive audiences, and they are a way to really engage them about routes that are changing. So Mr. Aguirre, your question about that area of Delray, that could I don't actually have the full list of the ride-alongs, but that is like looking for places where we're actually really proposing real change and trying to get engage people that way to understand. And not just hope that they would hear provide comments. And then we're going to do an Ask Me Anything on Twitter. So those are some of the big things where we'll be out kind of a more scheduled event. If you go to the next slide. So this is where, and you can see the map, I think probably slightly better in your handout, but where we are planning to be in the coming weeks. I will say that many of these are outside, so if there is inclement weather, we will reschedule. So the website at WMATA.com/BetterBus always has the most up-to-date event schedule. Next slide.
Yes, Mr. Aguirre.
Ms. Davis, while you're talking about this, what's language capacity for the blue shirts?
For the
blue shirts for the pop-ups?
So we using census data, we provide, whether it's like we're up in Silver Spring, we have Mark, we will kind of
deliver it to the site that you're at.
Yes. Spanish is virtually almost all, like that's a given. English and Spanish, I guess I should clarify. But then we will bring in other people for.
So how does that kind of work? So do they assist people through the survey? Do they give them more education? I haven't had a chance to go to one.
Usually assisting people. So because it's a pop-up, it's not really a presentation to be had. It's more engaging. Are you a bus customer? What route do you ride? Kind of trying to draw out how they use the system. And then either we will have tablets if they have the time to be able to take the survey there and walk through, or provide, here's take one to go home and survey at home. So again, we recognize that most people probably want to do this from the comforts of their own home. So we do have a virtual experience lab where we've got a couple of ways, and something that Peter was commenting, that people are already on there commenting on their routes or on routes that they wish we had envisioned, because there are certainly those out there too. But there's a way to say, like, put in your address, or place that you go, and you're able to see all the places that you can get to now with the visionary network versus what you could do in the in the current network, as well as understand what that differential is, like what that routing would be. So think of Google Maps, putting in your origin, destination, and it gives you those different transit options. Obviously, many of us love to look at a good map, so we do have the map library if you really want to zoom in there. And then we do have the survey to try to get a consistent amount of all participants. Next slide. So we are also engaging other audiences. One of the things we did here in the fall was asking a lot about how we're engaging youth. So we have done a number of groups with high schoolers, mainly in the district, but we're always open to other ideas as well. Obviously, we've been partnering with jurisdictional staff on this, and we cannot thank Kirk and Brent and colleagues who have come to Metro, spent a number of hours and days doing workshops with us hand in hand, looking at Alan as well. Looking at, sorry, the helping us really hone in on where we think the network needs to go, and then partnering with community-based organizations and advocates to get the word out. Next slide. So this would be those workshops that we've, and it's been, I think, really beneficial to be able to gain consensus on what we're working on. Next slide. Finally, we also did, because we recognize our bus operators, they know these routes better than anyone, right? They're the ones who can say that turn is fraught with peril. This road does not do well with a 40-foot bus. Like, we have worked, they've been part of these workshops as well. But over the past couple of weeks, we took the draft visionary network. We went back out to all of our bus divisions, and we went out to Q's bus division and the bus's bus division, and had walk them through the maps, and they were allowed to look at them, comment on them, provide feedback. So we were able to engage 500 different bus operators while we were out there. So next slide. This is the last one. Yes, next step. So yes, we are at 2 days in, 48 days to go of engaging customers, elected officials, any other audiences that we can talk to that want to hear from us on the Visionary Network. And then we're going to be getting all those comments, and that's what's going to help us refine that Visionary Network to think about those trade-offs into a near-term implementable.
All right. Well, Allison, thank you very much. Peter, thank you as well. I have a couple questions and I'll open it up to members. So I'm looking at slide 10 in particular, and that's the one that starts in Fairfax City. The real estate park. Much of that, some that goes in Alexandria, some in Arlington, and Fall Church, but much of it also is in Fairfax County. I guess my question is more of a process question. I know you're working with the jurisdictions, but as local officials in these jurisdictions, are we going to see two different sets of recommendations? In other words, how closely are you coordinating with the jurisdictions? I know some jurisdictions are actually, and we're doing studies similar to this even before WMATA started.
As we mentioned, they've all been at the table. So while we've been redesigning City of Fairfax with them, that I don't think that Fairfax or Arlington, Alexandria Dash were almost they were in those rooms too, and I think pretty much and Al, you can chime in, and anybody else who was in those in those rooms too. I think everyone was pretty agreeable. This was in some ways easy because it wasn't like who runs it. It was, we should have a bus on that street. It should go here. Oh, in our first draft, because this isn't our first draft. This is probably our 6th or 7th draft, right? The first one we had it over here, and I remember hearing a conversation. Well, in our plan, we really go down Ave Street. We should have the same. It should match.
Right.
So those sorts of things, I think. Not going to say perfect, right? That's again point to get. This is a time to get more of those comments, but I think we're reasonably aligned in this. This is where things need to be. Next step will be harder to figure out how to get there for sure, but you got to start first with what.
Okay, I appreciate that, because in just looking at this route, you know, with the two-way, you made the decision to go to Dunloring instead of Mosaic. You're connecting some hospitals, but you're getting pretty close, but you're system. So, I mean, I realize there are going to be choices that have to be made like that, but I guess the other question is relates on slide 17, where you are doing the live events, and I realize you're doing the virtual ones as well, but it seems to be very much focused on your jurisdictions. Everything's inside the Beltway, it looks like, except Fairfax City. Is that because primarily WMATA service is there? Because I mean, I don't see Richmond Highway here. I don't see the Dulles corridor.
Yes, it really is,
Okay.
because we aren't
That's fine.
out the Dulles, like we're Tyson's kind of where we, and so in partnership, when we were identifying where to have these, we wanted to make sure, because I know, for example, the county and Connector have been doing, not necessarily countywide, but, you know, they've been looking at South County. They've been, you know, as Silverline opened, there was a whole redesign around that. So a lot of that, I mean, and Dash did it before before COVID, right? And so we didn't want to confuse people as to like, wait, early you guys were out here like a year or two ago, right? Like, how are you out here again? So we tried to be mindful of that as well, to not confuse people and try to, you know, there's a resource conversation too.
That totally makes sense. Thank you for explaining.
If I could just jump into your previous question now, just to clarify that slide 10, that is just a snapshot of routes coming in and out of Fairfax City.
Right.
We do have routes going to the Mosaic District. We've actually added. We have routes going to the hospital you mentioned. So yeah, so we had a lot of discussion about continuing service to that. But this was just map, so you need to go online and look at the map.
Fair enough.
We have online capacity.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And I'll coordinate with Fairfax County staff. I mean, I'm not against getting to.
Yeah, no, we're hoping not to.
Okay.
That doesn't help it.
Questions from committee members? Mr. Snyder.
Well, thanks for undertaking this. I actually started riding buses shortly after Metro took over the system. Or the legacy buses from the private operators that were still operating. So, so a couple questions.
Yeah, Dave, the drinks one.
How do you find you should put bus service to connect to points? What's the level of demand that you need to have, either presently or projected, to justify that? That's the fundamental question for me. Talking about 24-hour bus service. Well, after 10 p.m., if I have one person that rides to the healthcare center, you know, one should have transportation to the healthcare system, but if that's one person, right? So I guess I'm going toward, are you envisioning part of this service being provided on a demand basis? Because the typical person doesn't react well to an empty bus with a bus operator. And I think we need to avoid that scenario. So that would be question number one. Question number two, so NVTC is working on a couple bus rapid transit systems, and NVTA is working with NVTC on a study. So I think we should assume that at least in one scenario would be that the bus rapid transit systems actually come into being. And, or option number, well, hopefully that's option number one. Option number two is they don't, or they will be 10 years from now. So you need some degree of service in the meantime. And the same thing relates to local bus systems. That is, if at the end of the day, we have two redefined systems that don't interact in an intelligent way, in an efficient way, then we really haven't succeeded. So they're kind of fundamental questions. You may not always have the answers tonight, but they're questions which I think have to be talked about and figured out. So maybe you have answers for them. First of all, how do you define when there's a need for bus service from point A to point B?
I'm going to answer your second question first in the sense, because it's the one, and Al, you can first question when we get to that point. But I mean, all the proposed BRT, the existing BRTs are need good service. They already have frequent good service. They need better service. They're all incorporated in here.
Can you go 2 slides down? I'm sorry, keep talking.
And absolutely, agree with you that the rider doesn't. Our philosophy has been the rider's not caring who's operating it or what the. Well, due respect to the people, the marketing people on branding, they want to get to where they're going. They want to be able to transfer to the rest of the system, and so that's how we approach this. So they're all in here, whether they become BRTs or not, or transitioning. We even, on the Maryland side, had the Purple Line that we wanted to make sure we incorporated, but also extended it, and we essentially have a series of routes, of bus routes that complete that ring around the region as well. So that's again in the visionary network where it is in terms of level of service. And you started as a broad question, but also specifically said about the overnight. So the overnight is not everywhere. It's not like we had every route, or we went overboard in routes running 24 hours. These are routes, many of them run 20, 19, 20, 21 hours already and have good ridership. We did add some additional corridors that we felt had potential, and we do we do show in the overnight map a bus out to Dulles. We do want to meet with the Airports Authority about demand after the rail shuts down, both actually at Dulles and National, to see what we, for employees and other needs. I mean, those are large employers with a demand that doesn't always match up with the rail service hours. So we think these routes are strong, for the overnight network that we're proposing. But certainly, if you think there's ones that aren't, again, comments are welcome on this. In terms of the general, what made sense, traffic, basic cell phone data. We saw. I don't have a Virginia example, but I know that we have two neighborhoods in the district that are divided by rail lines over on eastern part of the district, in the Maryland line. There is no way by transit to get between those points, but we saw a lot of travel happening between those areas, so we felt it was worth connecting with a bus. See what we could do with that. Al, do you think of something Virginia-wise where we saw a market that?
I think on the Virginia side, I mean, a number of them are, the visionary plan anticipating where, the way developments are going, that we see a market going, like the need to, like, we know that Fairfax County is building the BRT system on Richmond Highway. So it's like, well, really the BRT system north of the Metroway should connect to it. So rather than terminating in Braddock, we said, let's extend this down to Huntington Station and connect those two BRT routes together. Also, let's make sure that we're anticipating the increased demand that we're going to get at the new Alexandria Hospital site. And especially, there's even some connections to Fairfax County to make sure that, like a West Springfield and Burke connection into the new Alexandria Hospital site and things like that, in addition to where the cell phone data sort of showed us that there were enough people making connection to anticipate the transit would be a good connection.
I guess I mentioned also that one from Tyson's down to Fairfax City, which had been a route that was operating hourly, was not in some budget crisis. So it was a decision to stop that route. It wasn't carrying a lot of people. A number of years ago, the regions developed more, and our philosophy here, at least on Visionary, was less than 30 minutes. People probably aren't going to take it unless they absolutely have no other alternative. But if we have a 30-minute route or a 20-minute route, we can maybe get a small portion. As Allison mentioned, we have 5% market share. So if we, and that's weekday, it's lower. It's about half that on a weekend. We're not going to get 50% market share. We can go from 5% to 6 or 7%. That's a huge ridership increase from us, and yet a small moving the needle on what we're doing in service. So there's room to grow if we have good service. If we can cut through the traffic and serve the markets that are developing.
Peter, is that 5% just Metro bus, or does it include the jurisdictional?
All buses in the regional jurisdiction. The other 5% is on rail, collectively on rail. So transit as a whole is about 10%.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is what specifically are your criteria for when you offer bus service between point A and point B? The reason why is, I was born in the city of Falls Church. We started our own bus system, and it took one newspaper, one bus that was empty one day to justify during the financial crisis killing off the system. So I'm just trying to get at how do you can draw lots of lines on a map, and you talk to the typical person and who may have no intention ever of taking a bus. How about bus service from here to here? Oh yeah, that's a great idea. So how are you going to get a true measurement of demand usage to justify literally every line on the map? Have you done that before? How will you do it after you get public input?
So there are two things. A, it's that cell phone data that you're seeing the trips that are happening, right? So we're not we're not connecting subdivision with 2 acres of lot size to, like places that are either that don't have large trips, like that are not generating a lot of trips, or that are clearly in areas where transit is not going to be the choice, right? So we have both. We have the cell phone data. We also overlay that with census data to understand like propensity of people to take transit. So Mr. Stender, to your question, is it, down to an actual like calculation that you can plug and play and say like, yes, that's worth a transit line, or no? Then the answer is no. That said, we see when we make trips more convenient up against driving, right? We make them more convenient, we have higher mode share, right? Is it 1-to-1? Are we going to capture all of those trips on transit? No. But as we start to get those, like a trip that used to be 3 times, it would take 30 minutes by car, and it's now going to take 90 minutes by transit. If we're able to move that to be 60 minutes by transit, we have like the data shows that you get a ridership increase from that. So it's very much a understanding the larger market, where people are going, and then overlaying that with the census data, understand like more propensity to be taking transit.
Thanks.
Mr. Different.
You covered briefly how we go from draft visionary plan to what would actually be pursued as we get more operators. And I don't know if that's in a slide or if you could just slow down and restate that, because I share the questions on the 24-hour network, but I don't want to get that granular. I just mostly want to understand how we're going to go from visionary to what is next.
I'd say 2 things, and then Peter, if there's a third that I'd forgotten, that'd be good. So one of them is these comments, right? Like asking people for you know, someone looks at the 24-hour network and is like, you don't need service, fill in the blank, right? And there's enough of that understanding either from you and your peers, from the public, that sort of thing. So it's comments about what's there, but it's also the surveys that we're doing now. Part of it is really to drive those trade-off conversations, right? Because before September 2021, we really we did peak service really well. Midday would drop off. Saturday, Sundays would drop off even more, right? What a lot of this plan is beefing all that so we have consistent all-day service, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week for virtually all of them. And whether it's 12 minutes or better or 20 to 30, like it, you know, the frequency changes, but it's that 7 day a week service. So some of the trade-off questions are, you know, should we be focused on the peak, the midday, Saturday, Sunday, late night, overnight, 24 hours? Like, where do you prioritize that frequency, right? And so that's what really helps us then narrow. All right, so maybe 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. is too long, or maybe, you know, like, and so that's the feedback that we're really looking for. We've got some other trade-off questions in there as well, but that's what's going to hopefully help us at least get a level down. We will have to then have, you know, more difficult conversations about, you know, someone loves this fruit, but comes to show that might.
A little mindful that our chair may be trying to keep.
I know.
All right.
We could talk about this all day.
Other questions, Mr. Figueroa?
Two things. One, the hospital was brought up. I'm sure there's service going there, and hopefully it stays frequent because the hospital, I don't think we need to explain the necessity for that. And the second one is just another comment too. Nothing but comments for you guys. Appreciate all the work that's going into this, and I'm looking forward to stopping by on the 28th to kind of see everything in action. Calendar hasn't really allowed me to show up some of the other stuff, but I think Southern Towers is a really good way to see how it's working, because for my colleagues that may not be aware, Southern Towers is almost a city within itself, and there are a lot of different languages. So it'll be a good way to see how all this is working.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Any questions from anyone online? Phone? Committee members? Okay, I just have one final question and then we'll move on to the next topic. Talk about frequency of service, great points, 60 minutes, too much, doesn't usually work. What are some of, did you have any assumption about trip length in the visionary plan? I mean, are you assuming people will ride 30 minutes or more, or 45? Do you have any thresholds that you were looking at?
So, well, a couple things. First of all, length of the route itself, regardless of whether any customers are actually going the full length, was something we definitely look at, because the routes that get too long become very unreliable. So that's, you know, we wanted to not exceed that. I think we had a slide in here about talking about how more trips in the window. I mean, I think, you know, we do know people, there's some people who really need to make these trips, are making some really long trips, so we're not ignoring it. You know, we have a rail system that will get some of those longer trips much faster, so we wanted to make sure we have good connections. I don't think there's a magic cutoff number, but we were definitely looking to try to get more trips than the 30 to 45 minutes.
Okay. And I'd say we want to make sure that we're connecting to things on the ends. So if you were going just a little bit further transit, to go to where that transfer makes sense, for our operators then have places to take breaks and stuff, because that's also a big part of it.
Yes. Well, listen, thank you very much. Excellent work. Looking forward to hearing all the feedback and next steps on this.
Thank you.
All right. So let's move on. We have now item 4A on our agenda, the value of transit study. We have maybe some news tonight. I don't know, preliminary findings. The committee is going to hear two presentations from MBTC staff. The first is the value of transit to the Commonwealth, where staff is going to present preliminary findings. The second is an overview of the upcoming WMATA Operating Funding and Reform Working Group. So Before we start the presentations, Kate, do you have any remarks?
Well, I just want to give some framing that I think will become quite clear to everyone here is really we think of these two presentations are really part of a bigger conversation. And so one of them is really talking about those macroeconomic and actually other, even beyond economic benefits that having a well-resourced and well-running transit network within Northern Virginia, what that means to the rest of the Commonwealth. And the other side of it is then thinking within the context of Virginia, what are some of the revenue sources that could be on the table for discussions, again, within a Virginia context as a part of a larger regional funding for metro conversation. And so, so we do have two different efforts, but they very much understand the interplay with each other. So we're really looking forward to the comments that you have indeed. And so we've got Anne McGrain, who's been leading up our value for transit. And so I know she's going to dive in with some really, well, it is kind of hot off the press.
Yeah.
This will be the first time we're sharing this in sort of a public venue.
All right. Please.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Next slide. So as Kate mentioned, tonight I'm presenting the preliminary findings of our value of transit study. And the purpose of this study was really to quantify the value of Northern Virginia's transit network to the Commonwealth. And I think, most of us understand as people who live or work in the region that transit has a tremendous value in terms of job access and economic activity, but it's equally important for us to understand what the value is to the Commonwealth in terms of income taxes and sales taxes that are sent to Richmond. And again, as we have these discussions about how to fund transit, this return on investment piece can really inform and shape the narrative on the importance of transit, both regionally and statewide. Next slide. Oh, what did we find? For our analysis year of 2025, Northern Virginia's transit network generates about $1.5 billion in income and sales tax revenue to the Commonwealth. It's important to kind of make some comparisons back to our 2018 report. For those of you who remember it, that calculated the value of transit as $600 million, but we really did a number of methodological differences that help explain this new number. So the first thing is that we considered the local and regional bus service in our analysis. So the analysis included bus, metro rail, and VRE. And this is really because our transit system is interconnected and we want to make sure that we're capturing its value in its entirety. Then also, our analysis year, as I noted, is 2025. So we're capturing these additional years of growth and development. You have the development along the Silver Line corridor. You have the development coming around where Amazon's new headquarters are going. There's a lot that's been happening since 2018. And I should also just note that we did adjust our model to account for changes in travel patterns due to COVID as well. So made that adjustment kind of based on current data that we're seeing, and then forecasted that forward to 2025. And then lastly, and this is probably one of the bigger changes, as you can see in this graph on the right, we also considered what's known as total employment impacts instead of just the direct impacts that we looked at in 2018. And if you go to the next slide, I can describe that in a bit more detail. So in our analysis, what we did in a very kind of high level way is that we compared a status quo 2025 scenario in a travel model to a scenario in which we completely removed all transit from Northern Virginia. So you can only really travel by car. And in order to make that no transit scenario function, and by function, I really mean keeping congestion levels at a pain point that is similar to what it would be like in 2025 if you had transit, that required removing households and employment from the region. And so that process is how we got our 157,000 jobs that are the direct impact. They are the jobs that cannot be supported in Northern Virginia, given the tremendous congestion levels that you would see on the roadways. But then we took it a step further, and this is the part that we didn't do in that 2018 report, which is that we looked at indirect and induced impacts. And I think you kind of intuitively understand that, when there are job losses in one area, they often can lead to cascading job losses elsewhere. And the indirect impact is specifically those goods and services that were being offered to firms that were impacted by no transit. So if you have attorneys and accountants or your local office supply store, they might have to reduce their headcounts just because there aren't as many businesses in the region to serve. So that's the indirect piece. And then the induced piece is those people no longer have the wages to go out and buy their coffee, buy their lunch, go to the movies. And so those jobs are also impacted. So all of those together lead to a total employment impact of 311,000 jobs. So while the main purpose of this study was really to arrive at that $1.5 billion number, we also were calculating impacts to residents and workers in Northern Virginia. These stats really get at quality of life and cost of living issues. And there are a lot more details about these user environmental costs in our full report. So this is really just a snapshot. But some very top line findings, I noted the 311,000 jobs total employment. 270,000 of those are specifically in Northern Virginia. The rest are kind of statewide job losses, again, due to that cascading impact. Also 128,000 households. And what you have as well is, because in a scenario with no transit, you have people on the roads more often. They're experiencing longer trips, both in duration and in distance. And so they just have greater exposure to things like crashes that can produce serious injuries. Also, fuel and maintenance costs, more emissions into the air. And so this is where we come to these numbers of, you're saving commuters $46 million in vehicle operating costs, avoiding 150,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions. So quite an impact to the region as well. And so, as I noted at the beginning, transit is really a vital part of Northern Virginia and provides really substantial benefits to the Commonwealth. This $1.5 billion number is about 5% of Virginia's total revenues. And transit use in our region, it also alleviates the traffic on our interstate roadways. So when we were looking at these modeling results, what you saw was really in a no transit scenario for 2025, it fragmented the region. You have a breakdown in people being able to travel in any sort of reliable way, or really even the bridges into DC become nearly impassable. And so this is very significant. And then also there's a true impact too, in that removing transit, we found had a disproportionate impact on the low and moderate income households in our region and their ability to continue to live and work here. And that's another detail that we are exploring in more detail in our full report. But just, this is my very quick summary of preliminary findings, but I just want to point out that we'll be going to the Legislative and Policy Committee in May and doing the real full rollout of the full report to the Commission in June. And so with that, thank you and happy to take questions.
And thank you very much. I think one thing that might be helpful, considering one of the purposes of the numbers here, particularly the $5 billion, is to be able to do an estimate of how much of that can be attributed to Metro, to WMATA. So, that's going to be the push, because it's not the Q service or, Fairfax Connector. I mean, it's really WMATA that we need to be able to point to. This is a great number. This is a fantastic study. Your methodology looks really sound. So, but.
And that is something that we are proactively looking at right now.
Okay.
Have an answer hopefully by the May Legislative and Policy Committee meeting.
Perfect. That sounds great. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Snyder?
I think your methodology is really interesting because saying, okay, if we don't have this, then the argument would be, well, people will just drive more. Said that would cause the breakdown of the highway system. So I think that's really an interesting kind of link in the argument change. So anyway, I think this is fascinating work. Well done. Thank you.
Should we call this the Los Angeles scenario?
Hey, careful.
I know,
I was gonna say.
I know. Mr. DeFerente.
You could call it the current scenario plus not much more.
Having driven the 405 for one.
I was gonna say, yeah.
On slide 26, I mean, the question. Whether there's always a balance between detail and keeping folks out of the weeds. I just wonder if there might be a way to illustrate this at a little bit, not too granular, but illustrate this at a slightly greater level of detail, because I worry that the 1.5 billion and these numbers might seem big enough that people don't believe that you ran a whole bunch of econometric models and did a whole bunch of stuff. And so I don't know if it's just a question, because, if you think about what you get the visual of every bridge being stuck, and how do we show in Richmond that visual is a real thing if we didn't have this? And so I'm not prescriptive. I just think maybe between you and the whole team, there might be a way to just do a little bit more, one more slide or one more level of detail that could show coefficients, so that the people who don't want to believe this can't question.
You gotta see the report.
So it may be in the report. I just, for what it's worth.
Right, and I think there are kind of two answers there. The report will definitely go into more detail about a lot of the background, the sources that were used, the methodology, how we kind of reached this point of these larger numbers. And then also we have, more concrete examples as well of, in a 2025 scenario, a lot of the Potomac River bridges, even in the status quo scenario with transit, have peak period times when they're over capacity based on congestion levels. And then we have numbers of how much that over capacity increases. It's kind of 200 in the realm of like 200% increases based on what was already an over capacity scenario. And with that, we're able to calculate, if you were to try to do things like build your way out of the situation, how many more lanes those bridges would need. So there's kind of the more detailed methodology, and then also, and here's this number that would be very hard to do, if not. So we're trying to approach it in two directions.
I haven't read the report, so that covers, and both parts of that seem great to me. I just, want to make sure that the work that you've done is shown enough so that it persuades folks. Thanks.
The only problem is if you say how many more extra bridges we need, people might want to say, well, let's build those bridges.
Not for us.
No.
Put some tolls on it.
Oh, God.
Sorry. No, and just to follow up with Mr. DeFerrente's suggestion, and I think this is in the report, but visuals of transit-oriented development in multiple locations, that could be pretty powerful as well. Just line them up. Alston, Clarendon, Tyson's. You just it's visuals that way would help.
Yes, and that's kind of this purpose of this rollout of multiple committees before the commission. We're hoping to hone the messaging, really understand what people think is the most important from a visual perspective. And we're definitely thinking of how to make those visuals pop and how to really help them tell our stories. But we'll look into that even more.
Fantastic. Okay, Mr. Snyder.
That's comment. Maybe you want to pick a segment of like 95 or 66. Just show, okay, here are a couple of examples of what we mean. Like just a total breakdown. That might be something useful. And then finally, and I don't think this is for the research work particularly, but what do you do with the argument? Well, okay, so the jobs in Northern Virginia will just simply relocate to other parts of Virginia. If I represent other parts of Virginia, why should I care about preserving jobs in Northern? Because those jobs just move to my jurisdiction. Again, it's not for this research, but it's somewhere else.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Well, one more thing, what Dave with the visual thing reminded me of is what VRE always says, right? And that's a very glaring example of a good visual, right? VRE at the peak took off what, 2 lanes? So I'm with you guys with the visuals. I think it's really good to.
It's good. Okay, anything else? All right, let's keep going. We're a little behind, but we'll catch up. Next, the overview of NBTC's Metro operating, and thank you, Ann. Excellent. The overview of NBTC's Metro operating funding and reform work. So we're going to get a presentation from staff on that topic, and this was the group that was formed in response to direction given by the committee and the commission to address structural operating funding challenges at WMATA and what we're looking at in the FY 2025 budget. Yes, thank you. Given the complicated governance and funding relationships Virginia has with WMATA and BTC, we say as an organization are uniquely poised to get this conversation going. I very much appreciate this work and I appreciate the conversation, and I think we all recognize how important it is. Turn it over to Andy.
Thank you. So I think as we're all aware with the looming last fall at least, the numbers on the right, put out those numbers of the projected operating funding gap of over $700 million in fiscal 25 that would increase to over $900 million in fiscal 9. And as discussed, this gap is due to a number of factors, mostly due to the pandemic accelerating certain structural disconnects between expense and revenue growth that was pandemic, but the scale of this gap is significant. It's extremely large, and at least from the Virginia perspective, it's unsustainable to meet traditional operating subsidies because those are reliant on property taxes that are how our jurisdictions meet that. The purpose of the working group, which was discussed in the annual report on the performance and condition of WMATA, which gives some additional background to thought processes in the fall and with the commission on setting that up. The purpose of the group is to examine and develop options for a new financial operating model for WMATA with a focus on new stable funding streams. So the working group itself will be comprised of technical experts from jurisdictional and DRPT staff, and they will provide technical information and then eventually deliver a report with a menu of options to commissioners. That's sort of how we're looking at the big picture process. NVTC staff will seek policy legislative guidance from the working group through this committee, as well as the legislative and policy committee. And we hope that that would lead to inclusion of whatever those recommendations may be into the NVTC legislative agenda in the fall. Next slide, please. The approach for the working group is to use the successful process that the region used to secure dedicated capital funding in 2016. This can be rather quickly summarized as first looking at what is the gap that we're trying to achieve, what's sort of the region's target, looking at what the sub-targets would be for each signatory, and we use signatory, that's not a speak for Virginia, Maryland, and DC. And then recognizing that everybody has a unique funding and political environment, everybody figures out their package, so to speak. So the working group on the Virginia side here would look at examine revenue sources, structures, and policy considerations about how to get there. You'll hear me say those over and over again. So it's sort of 1, sources, 2, structures, 3, policy considerations. And though overall this process is envisioned would have regional touch points with DC, Maryland, and other stakeholders. And we also intend for this effort to integrate regional effort with WMATA and or other organizations. So first talking about sources. This slide here is looking at the working group's approach to how to look at sources. We tend to look at a variety of sources that are stable and sustainable in the long term, with considerations around the variety, the type of revenue, amount that they could generate annually, and then the long-term growth of that funding portfolio. And then I think most important as well is the administrative and political viability of said sources. Significant consideration. So we talked about sources a little bit, talking about structure. These are questions framed for the working group. This is just to give an idea of how thinking of posing for started. The first here is exceed said gap, and there are of course options in this space, which could be lowering the traditional operating subsidy, including additional Northern Virginia transit operators in a solution, as Metro is one of many operators in Northern Virginia. Another key question is what modes are we funding? Metro has 3 modes: rail, bus, and access. These are provided and consumed very differently across the region as well as in Northern Virginia. And this is where I point out that Loudoun County only has 1 mode, at least in Northern Virginia. In the WMATA context, there's a question, should revenues be allocated regionally within Northern Virginia, or which was done for dedicated capital funding, or is this like we do it for traditional subsidies, individual to cities and counties? And then lastly, where should any revenue trust and who should be paid? Next slide. So this slide here really expands upon that last question about where to hold revenues. There are currently 2 examples that exist in Virginia: NVTC, which holds the gas tax and state aid, as well as DRPT, which holds the funding. And they also do the pre-match. It's a little bit different of a setup. The dedicated capital funding is through an agreement between DRPT. There are considerations here about technical financial capacity, oversight, reporting requirements, relationship between WMATA and Commonwealth. So we've covered considerations around sources and structure, and then lastly is an overview of some policy considerations. I think the biggest here is Virginia's unique funding structure with WMATA, which is fundamentally different than how DC Maryland fund WMATA. We do have appendix slides with refreshers of prior committee content in this, just to make that. Again, another important piece is how our approach and solutions fit into a larger regional discussion. So this is something that's done in black box. Looking at something that is compatible with WMATA's funding approach. I think something that staff learned from the 2018 experience is to avoid unintended consequences when crafting law or policy. And then another is looking at, another consideration is looking at the need to change or modify any other laws or policies that would accommodate any potential new revenue sources or structures. This could include conversations about the 3% bidding cap. And then lastly, I think another major consideration is around any oversight or accountability requirements that could be associated with funding. So next slide, as far as the timeline, we hope to get underway rather quickly, given the need that is before us. We're currently in the process of securing consultant support. And the plans for the work over the spring and summer, and involve 3 working group meetings. And then we would have various touch points with this committee, with the legislative and policy committee, and then at least 1 staff level meeting with DC, Maryland, and Metro each. And then we plan to deliver all with presentations to the aforementioned 2 committees. So it'll be a very aggressive, content-filled process, but we look forward to it.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much.
Welcome back.
Really appreciate.
Kryptonite, right?
Thank you for doing this. I mean, this needs to be done quickly. And as we've discussed in the committee before, there are a number of policy and political issues that have to be managed. This is not going to happen without really a really intensive collaborative effort across Northern Virginia and obviously across the region overall. And I would say another reason I really appreciate this, and we heard at the commission last year, Randy Clark say, acknowledging the challenge here, the structural financial challenges WMATA faces, and he acknowledged that he's not going to be leading the solution here. So I think it's very important for MBTC to step up and provide this support. So thank you. Any other questions, comments, Mr. Geary?
A couple of things. So, do you have an idea when you might meet with Maryland or DC yet, or is that still coming up? I guess if you wouldn't mind keeping us informed. Personally, I'd like to not to sit at the table, but just to be able to sit in and listen. I'm curious what some of our counterparts on DC and Maryland have to say. So that's one, and then the other thing. Well, first off, it's super important that you guys are doing that, and I really appreciate that you're doing it. I think that we have an opportunity in that we have a friendly Maryland potentially right now, and I think we take full advantage of that. I don't know how else to kind of say that, but
Just did it, sorry.
don't say anymore. Yeah. So yeah, because if we can start putting things together now, then for next year we can really try and take advantage of all everybody that's in the room and everything.
Thank you, Mr. Geary. Any other comments, Mr. DeFrent?
I just feel like I need to know the appendix more deeply, and I think it's great that the technical leads, you don't want you don't want us to pontificate, but you do imagine that a few different stakeholders with political ideas decently regularly would be really helpful. And right now, I think just to be structures, challenges that we face, but I would imagine that have different political ideas together because we're going to have to be creative. And what? So I don't know. That's already something you were going to do, but for me at least, I need back to some understanding of some statewide issues that I think that probably others at the table have in greater command.
Mr. Smedberg.
But it also should be enough politics.
Absolutely. Smedberg, do you have something to add there?
No. I was just fixing my glasses. I think Matt was first.
Just
done.
Oh, is Matt on too? Okay, I didn't realize.
Yeah, Matthew was first.
All right, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to run in a second, but I just wanted to know. So WMATA is doing some of this work, and the chairman and I have had many discussions with the general manager and finance staff. But I think it's important on the solution side in particular that MBTC do this in a very methodical, data-driven way that leaves options out there. I think what I kind of envision Metro's role is to very clearly enunciate the problem and show what the impact of the fiscal cliff is and what that means for service. And I can tell you that it's very, very stark. And then others will need to take the mantle up from that point and work on the solution set. And I think WMATA can help inform those discussions, but I think it'll be helpful to have both business groups and groups like MBTC that are working on it. I think collaborating with the other jurisdictions is important. I mean, I don't interpret this as any kind of effort for sort of Virginia to, assert any type of control. But I think we want to be, careful about how we approach it that way to make sure that it's truly collaborative. Obviously, we have expertise about Virginia, the way we work, and we also have credibility in the General Assembly and the administration as experts in transit in Virginia. So it makes sense for us to do this work, but I'm sure that we'll be collaborative in how we approach it. But I just want to give a little update on kind of what Metro's doing. Now that we just passed our fiscal 24 budget last week, we are not even taking a meeting off, I can tell you, and jumping right into fiscal 25.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Excellent points. Mr. Smedberg, did you have a comment as well, or?
Yeah. I think exactly what Matt said. We've had a discussion or two with Randy. I've had a discussion or two with Randy. I think we do have to be very precise, very deliberate, as Matt said. Kate, Andrew, I think we really have to carefully think out things. I would keep the group really small to the reaching out to business folks and making sure the right people are engaged. A lot of times we don't hear from important voices. Pardon me. And, I think this has to be executed very carefully. Pardon me one moment. Oh, my allergies are killing me. Andrew, could you expand upon how you see the state's role in some of this, specifically DRPT?
So I think the quickest answer is I think the intent is to start with director level representatives from our 6 cities and counties, and then DRPT. I think beyond that, we're quite open and really thinking about this as a menu of options with those strategic touch points. We don't have the exact, we're working on putting together the exact layout and project schedule, but this is good feedback to us to help shape that on a very challenging timeline. So I think for the state, I think very much at the table, there's a lot of both political, structural, and other considerations that really are going to impact all of this and how they fit together and sort of the art of the possible. So that's how we're thinking about their
Yeah,
role.
the key for the larger issue of, WMATA, but, I think this question is going to evolve into something very different than just WMATA. And, fitting all the pieces together is going to be really complex, I think. So.
Excellent point, Mr. Smedberg. Thank you.
And also, Walter, if I could.
Please.
And maybe this is for Kate. Kate, who, other than, I assume, Andrew sort of coordinating and doing, a lot of this kind of work on the staff level, but who is going to be the face of this for us? Who, if, we're called into a meeting of, 6 people to talk about this down the road, who's going to be the person in the room? Who's going to be the face of this effort for us?
I mean, I think it's very much going to be me. This is a project that I'm going to be very involved in. I had the benefit when we did the dedicated funding of being at the table of TISDAC. It happened to be the consultants were DRPTs, but I was a part of that conversation. And so I envision that I will be very involved in this project. And just to add, there's obviously a technical working group that's going to be very important, but there's a lot of other conversations that are going to be going on. And obviously we'll be looking to the political leadership in our coordination also on a more political and very public facing later on. So yeah, this is something that I will be very involved in. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think one point that Matt, stated, the situation is pretty stark. I mean, it's dire, it's urgent. We got here for a lot of reasons, but yeah, I hope people understand that this is something that we're not going to be able to just, account our way out of, so to speak.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. Mr. Snyder?
Who's on the working group again?
So the working group, we plan on putting that together to be similar like we did with the 3% cap working group, where we are looking at what I'm going to call the technical leads within each jurisdiction. In some instances, that happens to be somebody called the transportation director, but we know it's a little bit different. But they are truly the folks who are smart and savvy about how transit and WMATA in particular is being funded by their jurisdiction. So that's the technical, that is the working group. But we do know, obviously, there's a lot of interface, relationships that we're going to have with you and other members of the commission on a political level.
So what I'm trying to do is figure out how we are going to include people who have an entirely different perspective. That is, they come from the finance world, or they come from the military, or they come from people who are used to operating big, complex organizations, and what decisions do they make when they're faced with a budget gap. I guess the next question, it sounds like though we have a narrow category of people that are on the working group, which is not, it's just to make the statement that it doesn't reflect a lot of different viewpoints. It reflects particular expertise, which is great, relevant. Who are you going to have as consultants then?
So we are in the process of selecting consultants for this right now, so that has not been, that procurement is still finalized, but the expertise is in the consultants field. They're to be bringing different revenue options. So in bringing in extra special speakers and other people, that's where I think we'd be looking to the consultants to be bringing in some innovative approaches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have ideas, I know you and I have talked a little bit about this.
Yeah.
If you have ideas about specific people or folks that you want us to talk to, I think we're going into this with all options are on the table. We want to keep in a very open mind. I'm seeing not heads nodding, which is good.
Yeah.
We're happy to take that in and then run with it and see how we can take advantage of that expertise.
Part of the reason of having the consultants is to be able to reach out and bring in.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other comments? Mr. Gary?
To Mr. DeFerrante's point with the appendix slides, I was wondering if y'all could actually put together a slightly more detailed slide for Maryland and DC, just to break down. It's not too much to ask.
So it's actually 2 boxes, WMATA and the District of Columbia. 1 check goes over, Maryland and WMATA, 1 check goes over. No, I kid you not. Yeah, that's exactly how it is.
Which part of each of them?
Oh, so it's,
Okay,
so it's the,
Yeah.
Because like,
the state of Maryland sends 1 check.
yeah, but what I'm saying is like a little bit more of a breakdown of like, so for District of Columbia, if you have any breakdown on like what percentage comes.
That
Oh.
actually, I have that in
Okay.
emails from last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's I know it's much easier.
You know, sources as compared to, yeah, I got it.
Because I think that just also helps to highlight how much easier it is for them compared to what we have to go through. And I think that's a good thing to kind of.
And it also highlights how currently the systems are financed differently. Jurisdictions, so.
Yes.
Well,
We do have, as I've said, we do have very strong relationships with folks both in the governor's office as well as in the District of Columbia. So that's a part of the staff level conversations, is making sure that we've got those relationships.
Paul, did you?
yeah, Walter, if I could, I think we should just be careful. I mean, yes, accounting wise, it's easier because they do stroke 1 check and the governor and, the mayor sign those checks. But, as we know in Maryland, we've been hearing that, they have some concerns and structural issues, financial issues with their trust fund. So It isn't necessarily easy for them to come up with the money each year because of the demands that they have, but it's, yes, procedurally or economic or accounting wise, it's easy, but they are statewide dealing with their own funding issues as we are because of how we pay. So just
And I think that's kind of what I was
be
alluding
mindful of
to.
that panic. Some people might take exception to that.
No, but that's kind of what I was trying to allude to as well on the side, because even though it's easy for them to just cut 1 check, it's good for us to know on our side, what is it that's funding that check and what the difficulties are. Because if we don't know what it is, then we can't, make any commentary on it.
Yeah. And the district, we know, with so many of the offices closed, what their underlying economic challenges are.
Yeah.
They've gone from, I don't know what kind of surplus to basically a deficit now, overnight, essentially. So yeah, they too have challenges.
It's easy to say that we just cut 1 check, right? But what goes into cutting that check? So
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other comments, questions on this topic? Okay, then let's, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Appreciate the work on that. Let's go into the final topic. We have a few slides on the 2023 WMATA Annual Report timeline. I think we all know what this is. This will be the 6th annual report produced by NVTC. And here's a quick update. So Andrew, back to you.
This should be pretty fast. So I think the idea here is to take a very similar approach as we've done in prior years. As far as the timeline for the annual report on position of WMATA, we would look to conduct one or more work sessions with the committee in the spring and summer. We'll try to time that strategically with other agenda topics. Write it over the summer, review it with the committee in the fall, and then have everything lined up for December 15th delivery to the Governor and General Assembly. We're still refining our approach, but at least right now we intend to utilize pretty much the same strategies from last year. We'll have conversations with the committee as we think through. Celebrate the opening of the station like we celebrated the Silver last year, and then think about how to integrate other recommendations like the results of the value of transit or results or menu of options from the funding working group, and how does this all fit together into sort of one package that is strategically timed. So that's our current thought process and timeline, which will be subject to a lot more internal thinking over the coming.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Any comments or questions from committee members? Okay, well, we look forward to next steps on that. Any last comments?
Walter, if I could.
Yeah, Paul, please.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just real quick, Andrew, our last topic of discussion, how is that going to fit into this?
The funding working group?
Two separate,
They're going to be separate.
Well, there will be a final report from the funding working group, exactly how, so that will be separate, that will be delivered to the committees. As far as how that integrates into the, I think it's going to depend. We're going to be very flexible about how that integrates into the annual report on Metro.
Yeah, I would think some of it would be the timing.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and also I think you want to think about maybe too, instead of just delivering it, you may want to do it in person maybe to a few key folks,
Oh, yep, absolutely.
Good idea. Okay.
I do think, you said a footnote, right? I do think even if you want the documents to be separate, you got to have a sentence in there that says, see this issue.
Yeah.
At least,
Yeah.
I think you can't avoid doing that, even if you don't want to get into any substance. It would seem like you would, but
We see other report.
I think we'll have a much better sense as we get into the fall.
Okay. Very good. Any last comments, questions on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we do have an agenda item for other items. Is there anything else that any committee members would like to bring up today before the committee? Anything else?
If you haven't heard, May 19th,
I
be there. Potomac Yard opening
What time is that going to be?
10:30.
Yeah.
Okay, I was looking for that.
Save the date just went out this morning.
Okay, good. All right. Be there, be square. Mr. Snyder.
We have not yet scheduled.
Yes.
Thinking June, but part of this is putting together that funding working group and when to touch base with everyone. So we'll be pivoting to scheduling hopefully next week and look for dates from Rhonda.
Yeah.
As we figure that out.
Agenda item of this committee be the working group.
Yes.
I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Good idea. Okay, any other items? Okay, if not, we're a little late, but we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Good.